What do you do with that has been entrusted to you? We have an interesting parable for today. Actually, quite a violent story. The parable of the wicked tenants, where a landowner leaves his vineyard to be managed by tenants, who upon the harvest refuse to return that which they have yielded. Twice they beat, stone, and kill the owner's collectors. So upon the third attempt, the owner sends his own son, his own flesh and blood, knowing surely they will respect him. But you all know what happened. Like I said, this is a violent story. In many ways, this is not the parable of the wicked tenants, but truly the parable of humanity. The parable of Jesus. On the surface level, Jesus is telling the chief priests and Pharisees this is the story of God and God's creation. It is the story of the wickedness of the world and the prophets sent to realign God's narrative. And thus it is the story of humanity's unwillingness to respond, of their ignorance of God and their viciousness to God's prophets. It is the story of Jesus, God's own flesh and blood, that when humanity saw it once again, they did just like they did to the prophets. They destroyed it. They beat, mocked, and hung the Son on a cross. But while this is the story of Jesus, we'd be remiss to believe that it speaks only to the past and not to us. The story begins with a beautiful piece of land, made ready and perfect for someone to tend. So the owner hires tenants. Now, a tenant is someone who temporarily has possession of the land. They do not own where they reside, but rather are momentarily occupants. The parable takes place on a vineyard, which further insinuates that they are more than just ordinary tenants. They are stewards. They are charged with working and nurturing the fields and the crops, which they do. Because why not? You have been given a vineyard. The problem is not that they refused to work. It's that they refuse the reality that they are working on behalf of someone else, for someone else. You know, whether we like it or not, we are all working on behalf of someone else. All that we do, all that we have, all that we set out to accomplish is not ours. We come and we will go. We will momentarily have our effect on the landscape of that which has been entrusted to us, but make no mistake, we will eventually move on. We will give what we have to another. You know this. It is a fundamental truth that we so often ignore because to acknowledge it acknowledges its very reason for the truth. Our mortality. But so often, we make the mistake of thinking we own what we have. Like the tenants, we don't acknowledge the landowner. And when we do that, we get possessive, we get hungry, we want more, and we sure don't want anyone trying to take back what is in our possession. And that makes sense. The landowner didn't work the field. I did. Your labor didn't create what we have today. Mine did. I get this mindset. Some days I am tempted by this mindset. But what Jesus is saying in this parable is that nothing is yours. It is a reminder from the earliest days of creation that we were all created of stewards of this earth, not owners. We must tend to what we have been entrusted, but we must always remember we will one day have to give it back. Even the most treasured property I have in my possession, that which I know I have made, even that, I do well to remind myself, it isn't truly mine. Rather, it is something that I have had the greatest privilege to steward. I'm talking about my children, about Mac and Liza. They might share my blood, but the reality is that they were given to Emily and me. And the most difficult truth, I believe, for any parent, is that we only have them for a few moments. We get to raise them. to educate them, to teach them the love of their Creator and their responsibility to their neighbor, teach them the privilege and the joy and sometimes even the pain of stewardship coming from those moments where we must let go. But we do this in recognition that they will one day be stewards themselves, accountable for that which has been entrusted to them. And I hope and I pray that when Emily and I have done everything we could to prepare them for their responsibility, that when we let them go, that they will flourish and that they will understand it too. This is the parable of stewardship, which to me is the greatest responsibility that God has given to us. It requires a nurturing spirit, a hardworking mentality, a labor of love, and more than anything else, generosity. To remember that you are stewards and all that you do will serve you well in life. From being a steward of this church, generous with your time, your money, your skills, to being a steward in your occupation, your community, and even in your family. Being a steward means taking responsibility with what has been entrusted to you. It is a recognition that all that you have and that all that you have built is not actually for you, but it is for producing, as Jesus says, the fruits of the kingdom. Stewardship is about generosity in all that we do and all that we undertake. And it will lead you toward the joy of those fruits. And it will lead you towards the joy of God's kingdom. I love you. God bless you. Goodbye for now.